we are privileged to celebrate this feast in a place where we have that element of separation from noise. We are ourselves very much at risk when we have no structure of protection of, by a process of osmosis, being contaminated. The priest is by nature also orientated towards contemplation insofar as he is mystically and ontologically conformed, configured to Christ the High Priest forever at the moment of ordination. He is taken apart from humanity and is the presence, in a sense, of the Trinity for his creatures until the end of time. That's the mystery of the Catholic Church. We can forget that we are different. And if we are not always operating in that mode of a vibrant relationship with him, then he's not free to use us. Now, I want to go into that a little bit more for a few minutes this morning, still in this optic of the desert in which the Lord has placed us for a few hours away from the normality which can condition us and damage us. The soul of the person who is a friend of Christ becomes like Christ. Love makes those who love each other resemble each other and imitate each other. How was Christ? He was dignified. He was in possession of all. Now we have an example indeed when he expressed the vindication of God the Father on his creatures in the form of what would seem to be anger when he expelled abuse from the temple. He used the language that was understood by the Middle East, raising his voice, or whatever he did, he got the message across, and he wasn't popular. Now, we have, therefore, that element of when we have to handle situations, always being in possession of the choice of means that we use. We never lose control. A person who loses control loses immediately what he's fighting for. Dignity and serene possession of the truth is far more convincing. The Lord was in full command of all he said and did. Indeed, in the Passion, he was dying as king. He breathed out his last. He chose the moment. Consummatum est. Now, that is important, that when we go through life, if we want to be the friends of Christ, we need to resemble him too. And therefore, attitudes of speech, of behavior, which are in discontinuity with the encounter with Christ, should be excluded. As we come now from the altar, where there was peace, there was the presence of angels, there was the presence of the saints and history. We were all there. That is the mode in which we, as priests, operate. We carry that with us wherever we go. And people must perceive that. We are other. There is a false notion of trying to evangelize through being with and being like in everything, spending hours in the pub, and so on. That is questionable. We need to remember that our time is God's time, and therefore to spend a long time in pure recreation and remaining at that level is questionable. Our time too is consecrated. And therefore, this element of not getting out of mode of being the friends of Christ, and therefore contemplatives, is part of the game until we die. We're never on holiday. We're never switched off. God the Father is never on holiday. He's always available. And that, by the way, actually physically manifests itself. We are not available to the people of God if we conceal our identity. People will not turn to us if they do not know that we are a priest. And many things happen simply because one is visibly a priest. All kinds of things come out of the blue, which would never have come out of the blue if we weren't. I remember one time coming towards midnight, along the main street of Rome from the Vigil of Pentecost with enclosed nuns. And there, on the Via Merulana, this gentleman came up to me out of the blue. "Would you hear my confession?" At midnight on a Saturday in Rome, on the main street. I had a tiny stone and I heard his confession. And it turned out that he was a priest. And if I hadn't been there, I don't know what would have become of him. All that just because I was identifiable. Whatever had happened. So the devil knows it full well. Try and evangelize by being like the others. The great evangelizer is actually of a different order if we want to get through. Joy and healing warmth. Grace builds on nature. And we need to cultivate the good points of our nature. And that is the first bridge of contact with other human beings. We meet them in their humanity. We don't lose our dignity. We respect and honour and revere them for the mystery that they are. And we meet them where they're at. And then, once they realise they are respected where they are at, then we can work on them. They're not judged. But the first contact is that of our humanity. And therefore it's very important that that element of joy comes through. The first encounter with a person is important. Knowing how to handle human beings. It's the first evangelization. In French there's a saying, "Un saint triste est un triste saint." But it's true. And it's very true with, for instance, little people, the angels of the earth, children. That's the first one. A good man, they pick it up straight away. They have antennae. They know when there's goodness and kindness. It's very important. And it's not difficult. So that's to be cultivated. The joy that we have from being Christ's should be felt and known. And that, by the way, comes through in all our comportment. Things happening in our priestly life without losing joy. E.g., we're in a meeting and some difficult issue comes up. And humanly speaking, one can get into two army camps. It can become emotional warfare. That depends a lot on the culture. Different cultures handle it differently. In the French and Italian one, it was quite interesting sometimes to see temperatures rising. In Britain, it's a bit more serene. But there is that element of realizing that if, for instance, we have, some meeting to discuss something for the Lord, it might be, for instance, very much for the Lord, like liturgy, or whatever it might be. And then what happens? This comes up. Temperatures rise for the liturgy. Now, what's going on there? Is there no means for a human being who's belonging to Christ, mature in his humanity, to handle issues in a model way for the people? And if they're not, at least he to be a balanced model in the middle. And there are ways of relativizing things. Everything is not cosmic. And that's part of the mistake of mankind quite often. Everything is of the same importance. It is not. Many marriages can break down because everything is important when the big thing wasn't seen. When I was young, we had the Beatles in Britain, and they had a song, "Life is very short, and there's no time for fussing and fighting, my friend. We can work it out." So that mode of going through life, sometimes actually almost diffusing a bomb through a witty remark, showing how stupid we are not to see what we're getting into. It's worth it sometimes, stepping back before we get to an almighty explosion. Usually, it's not out in life. It's not absolutely this and absolutely that or absolutely that. But if it's maturely handled, not either or, but both and. Therefore, an intelligent blend of both sides is usually the way out of a situation. Remember that, it's very important. And many things can be handled when we don't get into absolutes. Now, I want to reflect on this element then of, in that mode of being the friends of the Lord, always having one eye at him, as contemplatives. Contemplare is to look at, isn't it? To gaze at. We have always virtually that inner regard towards the friend of the soul who's in us, especially as priests, many times over in a sense. And then to carry that out by extension to all those that he sends us, that we look at them with the same regard of love, loving them into being, into their misery. But to do that, one needs, as I was mentioning yesterday, this element of listening and revering, venerating the mystery of that person in his completeness that we there want to learn. Now, a person who, by tendency, when in conversation, does the talking, will come out of that conversation as he went into it, with the same baggage, the same content, the same volume of knowledge. He will have an answer for everything. He will not have spent that time growing. He will come to teach. Well, the first delicacy and courtesy when encountering someone that the Lord is sending us is to realize this person is new. I have everything to learn. And then perhaps I can help where that person is not complete. Now, for that we have some great insights given by James in his epistle. In the first chapter of the epistle of St. James, we have this in verse 16. Make no mistake about this, my dear brothers, all that is good, all that is perfect is given from above. So we try to see what the Lord is already doing, and then we meet the people. People are not fundamentally bad, usually. There's goodness there. We suss that out. It comes down from the Father of all light. With him there is no such thing as alteration, no shadow caused by change. By his own choice, he gave birth to us by the message of the truth, so that we should be a sort of first fruits of all his creation. Now the truth is not perceived in its completeness, but people do not usually see a lie. They see an impartially complete truth. Now, remember that in any discussion, that people, if they see the truth, then they will back down from their position. If they do not, there's something else there, and the problem is there in that something else that is bad will. Unfortunately, that is something that manifests itself, because if a person, when calmly shown the truth, has this reaction of unexplainable aggression, violence, loudness, they are symptoms of another problem. They are at that point not wanting to know the truth. It's a different problem. So they have a problem on the level of their soul. And they are a problem also for other people when they are in important positions of influence. So the truth, calmly pointed out to, serenely possessed, for a person of goodwill, is the best convicting argument. There are ways and means of point by point indicating the truth. Do you know what happens to obstruct that process? It's when, during a conversation, a person jumps in and interrupts at the first premise to a long discussion that was to follow. And that point can never be made. It remains at that first point. And many, many intelligent discussions are blocked because we remained at what was only the premise of what one needed to say the real point. Human behavior is a comedy. Now, remember this, my dear brothers, everyone should be quick to listen. Now, therefore, this mode of the listening soul, operating on the vertical and the horizontal, is to be cultivated profoundly. Because the Lord is always speaking to us in one word of the scriptures, one word of an office of a mass which might jump into our ear and talk to our heart. He's also speaking through events. God is providence, and his language to us on a daily basis is the now, of what is right now coming to us, the moment as it presents itself. So, with the freedom and equality of humour, we engage with the grace of that form of his providence coming to us now, which perhaps was not what we had programmed, but there he will speak to us. And events also, if they are accepted, give us, on the level of the soul, that abdication which gives us freedom. Much pain to the soul comes from owning events, owning history. It has to be like that. I will worry until it is like that. And I will be upset if it is not like that. Well, if we truly will and only the will of God, then whatever happens, there is equality of humour and we suffer less. Now, therefore, that listening comes into that too, that we have no preference, only the will of God. What in French they refer to as la sainte indifférence. Quick to listen. Now, Sirach, Ecclesiasticus Ben Sirach, has the same thought. Be quick to listen. It's in chapter 5, verse 11. Be quick to listen and deliberate in giving an answer. Now that's important. Many people say the first thing and everything that comes to their mind. There's no filter. It was one of the mystics who was taught by the Lord. It may have been Teresa of Avila, one of those great ones, doesn't matter. She was given this teaching directly by the Lord that he wanted her to weigh her words. Weigh her words. That is, that before they come out, they have been in some way filtered and formed. And in our behaviour, one observes that. People who are actually speaking as they're thinking, there's no filter whatsoever. One observes other people who precisely know where they're going and are saying deliberately something to get there, and so on. But they're different modes. They're not, in psychology, people who are on the level of the primarii. They have the immediate reaction of, if you like, some person in a very primitive culture. They are secondari. They have this element of being in control. Now, when it comes also to our ministry, that element of being in control should come through. whether it's actually in the preaching that one calmly knows where one is going and lands quietly, without confusing people with too much clear thought, in possession of oneself as one gives the word, but also in any sacred act, that we are still in mode of representing and being Christ on earth in these sacred acts. I remember being taught this early on in the monastic life. If one makes a mistake, one makes it with dignity. An example was given. One is in a liturgy and one starts from point A to go towards point B. And then halfway across the sanctuary, one realizes actually one should be going toward point C. Now, an idiot would stop, go and change direction, and everyone will notice. Somebody who is reflective will carry on towards point B, fabricate something dignified to do, and then, with all deliberateness, go properly towards point C. Well, that situation actually is more common than one thinks. Behaving with dignity when one is making a blunder is quite an art, but it has to be cultivated, because the main thing is that we carry people with us into the beyond, which is above these little errors. But if those errors become the center of attention, then we've missed the point. And also when it comes to liturgical correctness, sometimes one has to do what one can in a situation, knowing that it's about love and honor and healing, and one should never cause pain in a sacred atmosphere, and certainly never to a child. A child should only have good memories of the sacred. And then with wisdom, this author Ben Sirach goes on, if you understand the matter, give your neighbour an answer. Now, many people will give an answer to everything, won't they? Even when they haven't got it. It's much more humble to say, well, I would like to look at that one in some detail. If you can come back to me, I'll try and get a complete answer. Now, that's impressive. It's both humble and honest, and you get the answer. Nowadays, with internet, one can find the answer very quickly. If you understand the matter, give your neighbour an answer. If not, keep your hand over your mouth. Now that's the position which many statues of St. Benedict have. And it comes from the rule which insists a lot on taciturnitas, that spirit of interiority protected by silence. And that's the cushion that one finds in any good monastery, an atmosphere of gentleness. But also, from the very opening words of the rule, one will find in different images of St. Benedict, he's holding a book quite often, his rule, and you'll find the first words, ausculta fili. And the whole ethos of a monastery is that mode of receiving. Ausculta. In French, the instrument that a doctor uses to hear the heartbeat, or whatever it is, the pulse, is the heartbeat more than anything, isn't it? It's the same root of auscultare that comes into it. And they listen very carefully. So that listening there is the mode of the soul in love with the word and the truth. That one is always listening. And the Lord has given us the hint in our creation. He gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. As though He wanted us to have, for every 1 word said, 2 words taken in. So cultivate that, it's important. In a conversation, there's everything to learn. I'll leave it there now, but it's kind of important because that's the first honour that we give to God and His creatures, that we have something